Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, that's not what I said at all, yet somehow you're the one being questioned, blamed, or put on defense? This happens more often than you realize, not because you spoke poorly, but because some people are skilled at twisting words to create confusion, control, and self-doubt. Today, this is about understanding how that happens, why reacting emotionally makes it worse, and how calm boundaries and quiet strength can stop the cycle without arguments, explanations, or guilt. Word twisting is not about confusion. It is about control. When a toxic person twists your words, they are not trying to understand you better, and they are not clarifying meaning. They are deliberately reshaping what you said so they can reposition themselves above you in the conversation. It is a quiet power move, and most people miss it because it sounds subtle, almost reasonable on the surface. It often begins with something small. You express a feeling, set a limit, or state an observation, nothing aggressive, nothing unclear. But instead of responding to your actual message, they respond to an exaggerated or altered version of it. You say you need space, and they hear that you are abandoning them. You say you felt disrespected, and they claim you are accusing them of being a terrible person. This shift is intentional because it changes the conversation from what happened to how you are now being portrayed. Once your words are twisted, you are no longer discussing facts. You are defending your character. That is the real objective. Control is easier when the other person is off balance, explaining themselves, trying to clean up a mess they did not create. The toxic person gains leverage by forcing you into a reactive position where your energy is spent correcting instead of holding your ground. What makes this tactic so effective is that it triggers self-doubt. You start replaying your own words in your head, wondering if you really did say it wrong, if your tone was off, if you could have been clearer. That internal questioning weakens your confidence, and confidence is the biggest threat to manipulation. When you doubt yourself, they don't even need to argue. You do the work for them. Another layer of control comes from emotional escalation. By twisting your words into something harsher, they justify their own reaction. Suddenly they are the victim, the one who is hurt, offended, or misunderstood. This flips the power dynamic. Instead of addressing your original point, you are now managing their emotions, apologizing for something you did not say, and trying to restore peace. The original issue quietly disappears. This pattern repeats because it works. Every time you explain yourself, every time you try to clarify your intent, you reinforce the idea that your words are up for negotiation. The toxic person learns that they can rewrite your meaning, and you will stay engaged trying to fix it. That is control through distortion, not volume, not aggression, but narrative dominance. Over time, this erodes trust in your own voice. You begin to speak more carefully, filter yourself more, or avoid certain topics altogether. Not because you are wrong, but because you are trying to prevent the inevitable twist. That is the long-term impact of this behavior. It trains you to shrink, to self-censor, to prioritize being misunderstood less over being honest. Emotional hijacking is one of the most effective tools toxic people use to gain control in a conversation. It happens when they provoke a reaction strong enough to shift attention away from the actual issue and onto your emotional response. The moment your emotions take center stage, the original truth becomes secondary, and that is exactly where they want the conversation to go. It usually starts when they feel exposed, challenged, or unable to maintain control through logic alone. Instead of addressing what you said, they inject emotion into the exchange. They raise their voice, accuse you of being disrespectful, mock your tone, or suddenly claim they are hurt by the way you spoke. None of this is accidental. It is a calculated move designed to pull you out of clarity and into reaction. Once you react emotionally, even slightly, the dynamic shifts. Your words are no longer evaluated for their accuracy, but for how they were delivered. They focus on your facial expression, your tone, your timing, anything that can be used to invalidate your message. This allows them to avoid responsibility while positioning themselves as the calmer or more reasonable one, even if they were the one who escalated the situation. The most damaging part of emotional hijacking is how quickly it rewrites the narrative. A calm boundary becomes aggression. A simple request becomes an attack. A factual observation becomes a personal insult. By provoking emotion, they gain the ability to label you as irrational, sensitive, or dramatic. That label sticks longer than the original point ever could. This tactic also creates urgency. When emotions rise, your brain shifts into defense mode. You speak faster. You explain more. You try to fix the tension instead of staying focused on the truth. That urgency works against you because clarity requires steadiness. The more rushed you feel, the easier it is for them to steer the conversation where they want it to go. Emotional hijacking thrives on contrast. The more emotional you appear, the more composed they can pretend to be. Even if they cause the reaction, they benefit from it. They can point to your response as proof that you're the problem, that you are hard to talk to. That conversation's always turn into this with you. Over time, this trains you to suppress your emotions not out of strength, but out of fear of being mischaracterized. What makes this tactic especially powerful is that it feels personal. It doesn't feel like manipulation in the moment. It feels like you are losing control, like you are failing to communicate effectively. You may leave the conversation replaying it in your head, wishing you had stayed calmer, spoken less, reacted differently. That self-criticism keeps the focus on you instead of on their behavior. As long as the conversation is about your emotional response, it is no longer about accountability, boundaries, or truth, and the person who redirected it successfully avoids ever having to address what mattered in the first place over. Explaining feels like the responsible thing to do. When someone misinterprets your words or accuses you unfairly, the instinct is to clarify, to add context, to make sure they fully understand your intention. In healthy conversations, that instinct can be useful. With toxic people, it becomes a trap. The more you explain, the more power you hand over. The trap works because over-explaining shifts the balance of the conversation. Instead of standing on your original statement, you begin layering justification on top of it. Each explanation signals that your words are open for debate, that your intent needs approval, that the other person has the authority to decide whether you are reasonable or not. This is exactly what manipulation feeds on. Toxic people don't listen to explanations to understand. They listen to find angles. Every added sentence gives them something new to question, twist, or challenge. If one explanation doesn't work, they ignore it and latch onto another. The conversation grows longer, more tangled, and further away from the original point. You feel like you are working harder and harder just to be heard, while they remain unmoved. Over-explaining also creates the illusion that clarity will fix the problem. You believe that if you just say it the right way, use the right words, or give enough background, they will finally see your perspective. But the issue was never a lack of clarity, it was a lack of good faith. When someone benefits from misunderstanding you, no amount of explanation will correct it. As you continue explaining, your tone often shifts. You become more careful, more cautious, sometimes even apologetic. You may start softening your original message to keep the peace. That softening changes the meaning of what you said and weakens the boundary you were trying to set. The toxic person senses this shift and pushes further, knowing that resistance is fading. There is also an emotional cost. Over-explaining drains energy and confidence. You begin to feel exhausted by conversations that should have been simple. You might replay them later, wondering why you couldn't just say less, why you felt compelled to justify yourself. That exhaustion makes it easier for manipulation to continue because you are less likely to assert yourself next time. The habit of over-explaining can slowly reshape how you communicate. You start preemptively adding disclaimers, qualifiers, and reassurances, hoping to avoid conflict before it starts. You shrink your message to make it more acceptable. This doesn't create understanding, it creates self-erasure. What makes the trap so effective is that it feels polite and mature. It feels like you are being reasonable. But with the wrong person, reason becomes a weakness they exploit. The moment you stop explaining, the dynamic changes. Not because you have something to hide, but because your words no longer require defense. Calm is often misunderstood as passivity, but in difficult conversations, it is one of the strongest forms of authority you can hold. When a toxic person pushes, provokes, or attempts to destabilize you, they are not just reacting to what you say, they are watching how you carry yourself. Emotional restraint disrupts their expectations because it removes the leverage they are trying to gain. Toxic dynamics rely on emotional movement. They need escalation to feel in control. Raised voices, defensive explanations, visible frustration all signal that they are getting to you. Calm denies them that feedback. It creates a pause where they expected a reaction, and that pause is unsettling because it gives nothing to manipulate. Authority does not come from volume or intensity, it comes from steadiness. When you remain calm, your words carry more weight because they are not competing with emotion. You are not trying to convince. You are not trying to win. You are simply stating what is true for you. That quiet certainty communicates confidence more effectively than any argument ever could. Calm also protects your clarity. When emotions surge, the mind narrows. You speak from instinct instead of intention. By staying composed, you keep access to your reasoning and your values. You choose your words rather than throwing them. That choice is a form of self-respect, and self-respect is visible even when nothing dramatic is happening. There is also a boundary embedded in calm behavior. It signals that chaos is not welcome in your space. You are not matching their energy, not mirroring their intensity, not validating their attempt to provoke. This forces the other person to either meet you at your level or expose their behavior further. Either outcome removes their advantage. Calm authority is especially powerful because it does not seek permission. You are not asking to be understood. You are not asking them to agree. You are grounded in your position regardless of their response. That independence is threatening to someone who relies on emotional control to feel dominant. Many people mistake calmness for suppression, but the two are different. Suppression hides emotion out of fear. Calmness contains emotion through confidence. You still feel what you feel, but you do not hand those feelings to someone who would use them against you. This is not avoidance. It is discernment. When you consistently respond with calm authority, patterns shift, conversations become shorter, provocations lose momentum. The other person realizes that their usual tactics no longer work. You stop being a reactive participant and become a stable presence. Stability is difficult to challenge because it does not chase, argue, or defend itself. Calm authority is not about being emotionless. It is about being anchored. When you are anchored, your words land cleanly. They do not wobble under pressure. They do not need reinforcement. They stand on their own, unshaken by attempts to disrupt them. Boundary language is not about sounding harsh or dominant. It is about being precise. When dealing with toxic people, long explanations and emotional appeals often blur the message. Clear, contained language does the opposite, draws a line that is difficult to cross without being obvious about it. Short, firm responses remove the space where manipulation usually grows. Toxic people depend on ambiguity. They look for openings in your words where they can reinterpret, challenge, or redirect. The more detailed and emotional your response, the more openings you give them. Boundary language limits those openings. It communicates your position without inviting commentary, debate, or judgment. A firm response does not justify itself. It states and stops. This is uncomfortable for someone who is used to controlling the flow of conversation. When you say something like, "That doesn't work for me," and then remain quiet, you are not being dismissive. You are being decisive. The discomfort they feel is the absence of leverage. Boundary language also changes how you experience the conversation internally. When you rely on short, grounded responses, you stay connected to your body and your values instead of getting pulled into emotional spirals. You are less likely to second-guess yourself because your message is clear even to you. That internal alignment strengthens the boundary before the other person ever responds. There is a quiet confidence in not overfilling silence. Many people rush to speak because silence feels awkward or tense. Toxic people exploit that tension. They know that if they wait long enough, you may start explaining, softening, or retracting. When you hold the silence after a firm statement, you signal that you are comfortable with the boundary standing exactly as it is. Boundary language also removes the need for approval. You are not asking for permission to feel a certain way or to make a certain choice. You are informing. This shift in posture is subtle but powerful. It places responsibility back where it belongs. They can respond however they choose, but your position remains intact. What makes short, firm responses effective is not the words themselves, but the consistency behind them. When your language stays the same under pressure, it becomes predictable in the best way. Predictability builds credibility. Others learn that pushing will not produce more access, more emotion, or more explanation. This kind of communication can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to keeping the peace or managing other people's reactions. It may feel cold or incomplete, but clarity often feels abrupt to those who benefit from confusion. Boundary language is not meant to soothe manipulation. It is meant to protect your space. Over time, these brief responses reshape the dynamic. Conversations become cleaner. Power struggles lose their fuel. You stop negotiating your limits in real time. Each firm statement reinforces the next, creating a stable perimeter that does not need constant maintenance or defense. Silence is often mistaken for weakness, avoidance, or a lack of confidence, especially in cultures that reward quick responses and constant engagement. In reality, silence can be one of the strongest positions you can take when dealing with toxic behavior. It removes the fuel that manipulation depends on and replaces reaction with presence. Toxic people are rarely comfortable with silence. Silence denies them feedback. It gives them nothing to push against, nothing to twist, nothing to escalate. When you stop responding to provocation, the conversation loses its momentum. What was meant to draw you into emotional labor suddenly feels one-sided, and that imbalance exposes the tactic itself. Silence also protects your words. When you speak less, what you do say carries more weight. There is no excess to reinterpret, no emotional spillover to exploit. You are not retreating. You are choosing not to participate in a dynamic that was designed to pull you off center. This choice communicates self-trust without a single explanation. There is a discipline in silence. It requires tolerating discomfort, both yours and theirs. Many people speak to relieve tension, not because something needs to be said. Toxic individuals count on this reflex. They know that if they apply enough pressure, you may break the silence to defend, justify, or smooth things over. When you do not, you disrupt their expectation and regain control of your energy. Silent strength is not about withholding communication to punish or manipulate. It is about discernment. You recognize when engagement will not lead to understanding or resolution. In those moments, silence becomes an act of respect toward yourself. You are choosing not to offer your thoughts to someone who would misuse them. Silence also creates space for observation. When you stop filling the air, you begin to notice patterns more clearly. You see how often the other person repeats themselves, escalates, or attempts to provoke a reaction. This awareness strengthens your confidence because it confirms that the issue is not your communication, but their need for control. In many cases, silence invites projection. Without your input, the other person may reveal more than they intended. They may grow louder, more dramatic, or more inconsistent. This is not something you force. It happens naturally when they are left alone with their own behavior. Your silence becomes a mirror they cannot escape. Choosing silence can feel risky, especially if you have been conditioned to believe that you must always respond to be respectful or mature. But respect does not require participation in dysfunction. Strength does not require constant explanation. Silence allows you to stay grounded in who you are without being pulled into who they want you to be in that moment. Over time, silence retrains the dynamic. The other person learns that provocation no longer produces engagement. Your nervous system learns that you can remain steady without filling every pause. This steadiness builds a quiet confidence that does not announce itself but is deeply felt, both by you and by anyone who interacts with you. Refusing the rewrite is about protecting the integrity of your own experience when someone tries to redefine it for you. Toxic people often attempt to take ownership of the narrative, not just of what was said, but of what it supposedly means about your intent, your character, or your values. When they succeed, you are no longer speaking from your truth. You are responding to a version of yourself that they created. This tactic usually shows up after you express a boundary, concern, or feeling. Instead of addressing it directly, they reinterpret it in a way that benefits them. Your calm statement becomes hostility, your need becomes selfishness, your honesty becomes cruelty. The rewrite is subtle but powerful because it shifts authority away from you and places it in their hands. They decide who you are in the conversation. The danger is not just in their words, but in the pressure to correct them. You feel the urge to explain yourself, to clarify that you are not the person they are describing. That urge is understandable, but it pulls you into their framing. The moment you argue against their version of you, you are acknowledging it as something that deserves response. That acknowledgement gives the rewrite traction. Refusing the rewrite means you do not chase their interpretation. You do not debate your intent with someone who is invested in misunderstanding it. You remain anchored to what you know to be true without trying to persuade them. This is not stubbornness. It is self-definition. You are deciding that your internal reality does not require external validation. This refusal can feel uncomfortable because it goes against social conditioning. Many people are taught that being misunderstood is a failure of communication that must be fixed. But when misrepresentation is intentional, fixing it becomes impossible. The rewrite is not a mistake, it is a strategy. Engaging with it only strengthens its position. By refusing the rewrite, you also protect your emotional energy. You stop spending time defending yourself against accusations that were never accurate to begin with. You stop rehearsing explanations in your head. You stop questioning whether you are allowed to feel what you feel. This conservation of energy restores clarity and confidence. There is also a quiet boundary in refusing the rewrite. It signals that your inner world is not open for negotiation. Others can react, disagree, or walk away, but they cannot redefine your motives or rewrite your story. This boundary is not loud. It does not require confrontation. It exists in your consistency and your restraint. When you consistently refuse to accept distorted interpretations of yourself, patterns become visible. The person attempting the rewrite may escalate, repeat themselves, or accuse you of being uncooperative. These reactions reveal that the goal was never understanding, it was control. Seeing this clearly reinforces your decision to stay grounded in your own truth. Over time, refusing the rewrite strengthens your sense of identity. You become less reactive to how others label you and more connected to how you know yourself. Conversations lose their emotional charge because your worth is no longer on trial, and your voice no longer needs permission to exist. Inner stability is the foundation that allows you to navigate interactions with toxic people without losing yourself. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are, what you value, and what you will or will not tolerate. Toxic individuals often test boundaries, push buttons, and provoke reactions, not because they are inherently more powerful, but because they detect inconsistency or vulnerability in others. When you are stable internally, their attempts to destabilize you lose effectiveness. Stability begins with self-awareness. Understanding your triggers, your values, and your intentions gives you a reference point to return to when someone attempts to distort reality or provoke emotion. Without this internal anchor, you can easily get pulled into reactive patterns, doubting your words, questioning your judgment, or over-explaining yourself to regain validation. Knowing your truth means that even when someone misrepresents you, you are not disoriented by the narrative they try to impose. A stable mind recognizes that control over your emotions is not about suppressing them, but about choosing how and when to engage. Toxic people thrive on reactivity. They escalate conflicts to create a sense of urgency, confusion, or guilt. When you respond from a place of steadiness rather than reaction, you remove the lever they rely on. Your calm does not indicate passivity. It communicates unshakable presence and authority. Emotional independence is a shield against manipulation because it signals that your energy is yours to control, not theirs to drain. Inner stability also fosters discernment. It allows you to distinguish between what deserves your attention and what does not. You do not need to correct every misinterpretation or respond to every provocation. Stability gives you the clarity to pick your battles, engage when necessary, and disengage when engagement only serves their manipulation. This discernment reduces mental exhaustion and strengthens your capacity to maintain consistent boundaries without feeling guilty. Moreover, inner stability reinforces your communication. When you speak from a grounded place, your words carry weight because they are not driven by anxiety, fear, or the need for approval. Toxic people often challenge your statements or intentions to provoke doubt, but stability ensures that your message remains clear and consistent. The more stable you are internally, the less likely you are to be swayed by distortions, accusations, or attempts to rewrite your narrative. Consistency is another key aspect of stability. When your behavior and responses are predictable in their steadiness, you create a framework that toxic individuals cannot easily manipulate. They cannot provoke inconsistency because your reactions are rooted in principle rather than impulse. Over time, this consistency communicates that attempts at control or distortion are ineffective, which shifts the dynamic. The person seeking leverage begins to recognize that manipulation no longer produces the desired effect, reducing future attempts. Finally, inner stability nurtures self-trust. When you trust yourself, your judgments, intentions, and reactions, you do not need external validation to feel secure. This self-trust acts as a buffer against manipulation because it diminishes the power that others can have over your perception of reality. You can observe toxic behavior objectively without absorbing it emotionally, maintaining clarity and protecting your well-being.